Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back at another episode.
I'm too. We just watched a great episode, one of our faves.
Yeah.
And we have our first actor guest. We're starting off with a bang. The brilliant Silas Weir Mitchell.
Wow.
Silas
Plays
Weir Mitchell.
Haywire, the inappropriate, horrible, terrible plot twist cellmate. of
No good,
Michael.
very bad.
Yeah.
Threw a
I'm
serious
honored
wrench in the
that-
works.
I'm honored to be
Welcome.
the first actor guest. I can't believe that.
Yeah.
You are. You're also our first of the Fox River 8, which is
Wow, well done.
I was able to rewatch the episode and it was amazing. Some of it I really remembered well, and some of it I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, I forgot about
Like full scenes?
No, just the feeling, like the yard, man. Like being in the yard was so creepy. But I can tell you, hanging out in the yard in a prison that was built by the inmates, where they hanged people in the yard, and where there was a sign.
Wow.
There was a sign that was basically, don't serve time, make time serve you.
make time serve you.
And I was told when I did a tour of Joliet that it didn't have, I mean, it was shut down in the late 80s or early 90s, but it didn't have indoor plumbing until the late 70s or something.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it was all like nothing. It was just brick and steel, no plumbing.
And the
So just chamber pots?
Outside, you would go outside. There was like,
but like if you had to
outhouses,
take a
basically.
shit in the middle of the night.
out bucket,
you hold it.
Wow.
and then they would dump all the buckets outside. Silas, one of the things I noticed
It was definitely
about
a haunted place. I don't know about real ghosts.
one of the things I love about your characterization Haywire is that he's not foaming at the mouth all the time. Like he seems like a very smart guy who's very self-possessed, no pun intended, or no double meaning intended, and that he is just mentally ill. I think a lot of times shows will have characters that are just like, oh, this guy's going to gum up the works because he's a friggin' psycho.
I may misspeak here because God, this was how many years ago? Let's,
it was 47 years
I think
ago.
it was in 1947. Yeah.
It was.
It was a long time ago.
They colorized it. They colorized it great.
Still good at that now. I think what you're saying is very accurate on the level of the writing, creating a character who is deeply emotionally troubled, but is also wicked smart. And it's that the reason that I go off the meds is I see the thing that's happening, right? I mean, it was a brilliant stroke for the writers to create a character that I feel like they could use to go in all these different directions. Like I could fuck things up this way. I could fuck things up that way. I could, I was a little bit of a wild card for the writers. If they got in trouble, they could be like, oh, he could do something. That's the feeling that I had at the time. But it's also because he's not like bonkers crazy. He's sort of crazy like a Fox River 8. Because I see what's going on. And the reason I go off my meds is I'm tantalized by what's going on, and the meds dull that. So the choice to go off the meds, I think, is related to the whole thing. And then that is exploited by Michael, as tries to work around it. But I definitely, there's one scene in this where I was like, I was biting some serious cuckoo's nest, which was the when they shine the light in my mouth to see if the pills are gone. I think there's a sequence in Cuckoo's Nest where he takes the thing, he doesn't swallow it, and then I think it's with Martini, with Danny DeVito, where he takes the thing back out of his mouth and poof, sort of hawks it off of Martini's head. So I was definitely there was a quote in there, but I had so much fun on this. I mean, it was like a match made in heaven.
But it's also honest. I mean, I think we all know people who are bipolar, and my sister was bipolar, and that was the thing: is the medication works, but it takes away the mania. It takes away the genius and the creativity. And I think for a lot of people who are bipolar, it's really difficult to choose the stability over that extraordinary moment. And so, there was a question, we'll get to some of this later, but there was a question from one of the fans about, do you think Haywire would have been written today? And it actually felt to me like he was written not with a sort of like general, he's crazy, as Paul was saying, but that with some specificity and responsibility to the fact that this is a real person with a real diagnosable condition.
Right. And
I also think there's something interesting going on that he recognizes. One of the things about Michael is that he's a genius, that he's brilliant. And there's something that Haywire immediately kind of clocks that. Like he clocks, even before the tattoos, he clocks there's something going on with this guy.
Yeah.
And I think Michael has the same thing about Haywire. It's not just, I Don't Sleep is an amazing out of an episode.
Yeah.
That's the previous episode, which is, oh yeah, you're going to be digging on I Don't Sleep.
Yeah.
But that they're kind of, well matched in that hero-villain way, in that, like, oh, this is no pushover, this guy.
That's very interesting.
There's a similarity.
I had not even really put that together in terms of course, there's a relation between the guy who does the map and the guy who can see the map. I mean, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think I was meant to be on the show for that long. They told me it was like a 2-episode shimmy. And I
That's
think
great. I love when that happens.
I know, me too. It was great. And I think they realized there was a good match character actor, but also like it was a valuable storytelling tool to have a character that you really didn't know what might happen, which means the writers, because they were writing that script is like the map, you know what I mean? It's like really like a clockwork universe.
Insane.
It's insane. I was going to say one thing I noticed was even now, I mean, I know it's kind of old, but it was one of the progenitors of the like cliffhanger every 15 seconds. There was 24 and then there was Prison Break, where like every commercial break is like life or death. But I realized that even given the sort of like bang, bang, fast pace of it, there's still heads and tails on scenes that they lose nowadays. Even in that show where it was like the pace was like freaking relentless, even by today's standards, there's a few extra seconds where you get to just live with the person before the scene, quote unquote, starts, and live with that person after the scene, quote unquote, ends. And now it's just like, nope, sorry, we got to plot.
Well, and there was an understanding, I think, on the part of the directors and the editors that acting doesn't only happen on a line.
Right.
That sometimes people act without talking. And I realize how stupid that sounds, but...
Okay, I have a wonderful notion about this that I got from a guy who I've studied Shakespeare with for the last 5 years, who was under Peter Hall at the RSC. He's absolutely genius, this guy. And he talks about filmed Shakespeare and how the camera's always on the person who's talking. And that's not where the action always is. And he relates it to soccer. And he says, when you're watching a soccer match, you don't watch the ball the whole time. You watch what is going on is in order that the ball is going to go to.
But in television, up until around the early 2000s, maybe even a little later, one of the reasons television was like that was because they were small. And they had to be shot in close up, basically.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so the Adelstein index.
Our Adelstein index for this episode the episode is titled Cute Poison. It premiered on Monday, September 12th, 2005. It was directed by Matt Earl Beasley. and written by Matt Olmstead. I believe this is the first episode Matt is credited as writing. And he would go on to become the showrunner of the series in season 2 and seasons 3 and 4 as well. Here's our little blurb from TV Guide, I believe. Michael gets more of the tools and people he needs, but someone very high up has taken notice and started wondering what he's up to.
So ratings-wise, our show aired Monday, 9 p.m. slot, right after a rerun of last week's Prison Break episode, Cell Test. Again, it was up against ABC's Monday Night Football. The final score was the Falcons 14, Eagles 10. To anyone who cares about that, which is, I'll be honest, not me. I don't even really know who those teams are. Also, a rerun of 2.5 Men on CBS, a rerun of Las Vegas on NBC, continuing this very nice opportunity they gave us to find an audience while everything else was in reruns. Against that competition, episode drew 9.15 million viewers.
Wow.
Up from the previous episode and lower than the pilot, which is kind of how network ratings worked back then. I know, Silas, we've talked about this a few times, but what a network wouldn't give for 9 million viewers.
9 million viewers. Some other things going on. September 12th, 2005, Hong Kong Disneyland opened its doors for the first time. Vimeo, the video sharing website, was launched. The Pussycat Dolls released their debut album, PCD, which I believe stands for Pussycat Dolls.
Nothing gets past
And
you.
Speaking of prisons, Martha Stewart's daytime talk show, Martha, premiered her comeback after her prison sentence for insider trading. And that's the Adelstein Index for this episode.
And here is the rewatch.
Or some highlights from
3, 2, 1.
Play.
Silas Weir Mitchell, ladies and gentlemen, who I just learned is named after his grandfather, who was a 19th century physician.
Well, how did you learn that?
I Wikipedia'd him.
Okay. There's a great reveal about
Jesus.
why she's chopping vegetables. You know that there's a whole reveal about that.
If I knew that, I forgot.
Oh!
Yo!
Ow!
Ah, dude.
Everybody dies and comes back to life.
Did you come back to life?
Yep.
Samesies.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jen Kern.
You know every actor here. It's amazing.
Well, she does spit in my face in season 5. And with that, we'll be right back.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So backing up, you were talking about the specificity of the diagnoses of haywire. You said to me once, I remember we went to some event together, and I had just seen your work, and I was like, dude, you play crazy great. And you were like, that's my stock and trade.
Yeah. I mean,
is that, have you just played everything the DSM? Do you feel typecast and stuck? Did it leave? Tell me more about that.
There's a confluence of factors here. There's physiognomy. There is general temperament. I have a lot of energy. There is also, I think when I was younger and I was working as a younger actor, I said one time in a class, this is totally organic. Someone said, what are you most interested in as an actor? And I was like, I want to know what's really going on in the experience of the people who are fundamentally, psychostructurally different than the norm. The guy who's talking to himself on the corner, what is the inner experience of that? Not what we can diagnose of it, but what is it? And somehow, I think it was one of those moments where I cast a spell over myself or something. And that became one of the foundations of my early career anyway. But I did it again. I've done it before. I've done it since then.
Was there a moment in your career where you had to call your reps and be like, I don't want to read for another pathology?
Yes. And I didn't for a long time until something came up and I did it and it was terrible, unfortunately. Never believe
Grimm feel?
Never believe the director when they tell you to do more.
Oof.
Yeah.
Did Grimm feel like a pathology? I know it's a different universe almost, but did it feel like you were exploring a pathology, or did it feel like normal world, or is it a complete? I mean, obviously you make it real, you make it yours, and you give it truth. That's kind of our job description.
Yeah.
But did it feel like you were exploring a similar? Like, if you look back on when you cast that spell over yourself, did that fit into that narrative, or was that a separate thing?
It did fit into that narrative in a way, but it was that world was populated with such like intricate, tactile, like the world was so real in Grimm. And the human relationships were so foregrounded that, to me, the experience of having this inner being, it really manifested more as a psychological habituation that we all have.
Yeah.
That is like, and in fact,
Yeah.
this is interesting. The word Wesen, Wesen, in German for the creatures, most people have a Wesen. That means soul in German, or spirit.
No way.
So it kind of transmuted into less of a pathology and really more of a like, this is like a psychological tendency, a mental habit, a behavioral thing that I contend with, as do we all, from family of origin.
One of the questions asked on our Instagram at Prison Break Podcast was from I Am Awkward Aaron. He asked, did you or anyone you were in a scene with do any improvisations, or was everything from the script? When you were rewatching that episode, Silas, did you remember any? Because your stuff is pretty loose, and the show was not in that way, in my memory, loose. There was not much, even physically, or
much. I don't think so very much. On Grimm, they would let me rewrite lines. They just, at a certain point, they gave it over to me because they trusted me after a season and a half. They were like, you can do what you want and just run it by.
And they were sick of your emails.
Well, yeah, but they also answered my calls, and they would I would come in. I was pain in the ass. They were like so open to it. It was not that way on Prison Break. I didn't have the status. And B, it was just not run that way. I feel like any improv was really nibbling around the edges. Like Peter Stormare, who I loved working with, because he was just, talk about a wild card. I mean, he was wonderful. You didn't know what are you doing? Where are you going? I love him. Yeah. He had that same quality of like, did he make that up? And I don't think he did. I think that they were pretty hardcore, because they, especially in the first season, they were like, we are constructing an origami universe here, and you have to really get the words right in case it's going to screw something up down the road if you don't say it like we wrote it.
It's okay.
Prison Break, an extra N in there, asks, what was the most difficult scene to film as Haywire?
It wasn't my demise, because that actually flowed. And I loved shooting that scene, even though poor Bill was just shitting bricks because he's afraid of heights. And we were like on the top of a water tower, and he was like really gutting it out. He was gutting it out that day. But that was really fun. The hardest scene for me, this is going to sound weird, and it's just what's coming up now, is also in the second season, when I find that boat that's under a tarp. And I think you were shadowing this.
Oh yeah,
and you had your Gilligan hat.
Sergio Mimica Kazan. I was.
Yeah, and so
I had my Gilligan hat on.
You had your Gilligan hat on. You were shadowing, and I had like a 2-hour scene where I just had to get on the boat, and they were just like, just do some shit on the boat. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? They were like, I don't know, just you're happy you found a boat in the backyard, so you get under there and you're on the boat. And action.
Boat stuff.
Yeah. And so it was one of these things where just like pulling, you're like pushing a rope. You don't even know, it felt like the longest 2 hours of my life.
Mhm.
The director didn't
Mhm.
really feel like he was invested in this. It felt like I looked over to the video village and he was like looking at the scene up. It was just like, we got to get some shit
Okay,
at
so
down on the boat.
Oof.
wait,
That
because
is
we've been talking a bit
that's
about
really hard.
Yeah,
That's
those are
really
so
hard.
hard.
what's the better version of that you get from a director? I think this is actually interesting for listeners because Paul and I both direct now, and so we've been kind of talking a bit about this as we've been going through.
It's
For the
what's the
directors out
story?
there, what's the better version of this?
Better version of that
If
is
you've got
what's the story? What's the story that's happening to you right now? And what are the chapters of the story? And what are you going through as you, there's the discovery, there's the fear, there's the delight. It's like, what are you doing? And what do you want? And why? And what's the story? It's not just get on the boat and fuck around, dude.
I think that if a director can turn that into, I think what Silas is saying is, what am I doing?
One of the best directors I ever worked with came up as an AD. And before she started directing, she took a year off and took acting classes.
Right.
To learn the language of being able to say to us, hey, Paul, my thinking is you're on your way out of the scene, but you can't quite cross the threshold of this door because you're afraid of what's on the other side, which then gives me an opportunity to move towards you with the camera and get my push-in moment for the end.
Right.
This is the language translation issue that I think sometimes arises between a script that says montage of Haywire on a boat, which is a result, and the translation that needs to happen on the directing side to say, hey, I want you to start out delighted, and then I want you to discover that there's no rudder, and I want you to get frustrated by that and try and problem solve, So quick pivot. Silas, you said something about not changing lines. You said I didn't have the status on the show.
Yeah.
And that made me think of, so you have been a series lead. You have been a recurring character. You have been a guest star. Like, you've really kind of occupied each one of those very different experiences. And with it comes radically different status on a set, radically different set of responsibilities. You want to speak to that at all? Like what you prefer, feel comfortable with?
No, that's a really good question. And it's very simple. It's like when you're a guest star, you are a nail, and you go in and you just do your nail, and you're not building the house. You're
Get
not
hammered.
the house. You get hammered, and they put you where they want you, and they hammer you right in there, and they tell you what they want, and you do it. That's the guest star. And then, recurring, you slowly begin to maybe have a relationship with some of the folks on set. So there's a looseness and a camaraderie that sort of can develop with the camera and the folks. And so you feel a little bit more like, like a lot of times working with the camera people is where it's at. You're like, do you need, if I'm here, does that work? Cause I feel like I want, that's really fun. And that can begin to develop if you do 2, 3, 4, 5 episodes. And then, the series regular situation is just like you're a family after the first couple seasons, and you trust people ideally, and your ability to impact the production in the way that you feel is relevant and forward moving is definitely expanded when you are one of the primary colors that they're using to paint the picture. Terrible
like
mixed metaphors.
One of the interesting things, though, it kind of happened to me on Prison Break, but it really happened to you on Prison Break, is an experience. It's kind of like a hybrid experience, which you come in to do a thing.
Yes.
And Prison Break was really good about this, especially for a show that was so tightly plotted. They would say, this character is working for our overall whatever, and this character isn't working for our overall whatever. I mean, there were series regulars killed off, there were series regulars added, and there were things that I think they were, and I'm not just complimenting myself, I'm complimenting them for saying, oh, I like where this is leaning, let's lean into that, and let's make a meal out of that. A lot of shows just don't do that. I was also on a Shonda Rhimes show, that's one of her incredible strengths, is kind of knowing, she'll put people together for a scene and be like, I never want to see them together again, or like they're going to get married in 5 years. Like she just has this thing she knows. And I think Prison Break was really good at like someone like Haywire knowing the value of that. Again, like not to talk about like, oh, this is what the business has become. One of the crazy things about doing 22 episodes a year is that like, you know, I'm sure a lot of it was outlined, but man, they were laying a lot of track right before we shot it, as opposed to, for instance, now Netflix, they want all 8 or all 10 episodes written before you shoot page 1. You're not making those adjustments in episode 4. You can't.
I totally agree.
No.
I totally agree. And they get props not only for being able to do that, but doing it in, as you said, such a tightly plotted show that they still had the bandwidth and the room creatively to lean into places that they might not have already sort of carved out. I wanted to piggyback on something you said, Paul. Just about the idea of laying track for the second season. I remember we didn't know who was going to get out.
Right.
But we knew whoever gets out has got a job for next year. And so there was like every single scene that was written was like knowing that they had figured some stuff out that we didn't know what it was, but they were really ahead of it, and they were creating the next thing while we were doing, I'm just reiterating what you said, but from the inside, it was like, shit, man, what is going to happen? Who's going to get out of here? I was so psyched when I realized that I was getting out. I had no idea until I think I read the last episode.
I remember the excitement on set when episodes would drop. We had a gaffer, Tony, who was so lovely, so Chicago. And one day we couldn't find him. And like, Tony was not that guy. And everyone was like, dude, APB on Tony. We're trying to shoot some stuff. They found him like behind the grip truck reading the script.
Yeah.
And there was an excitement. There was it was one of those shows where, you'd flip to the back page and be like, I don't know, am I dead?
Am I dead?
Again.
Yeah.
But there was an excitement, and it was amazing because our crew read it. Yeah. And that meant a lot to me. I remember going, hey, Tony, if you need to be AWOL for 10 minutes because you're trying to see what's happening next week, I am all in for your all in.
Yep.
There was also an incredible currency becoming friendly with department heads because they got them first.
Right.
Oh, I didn't figure that out season 1.
Oh, I did.
It was the makeup. Hair and makeup.
I did.
Hair and makeup.
I bet you did. You've been in the business longer.
When's the new director coming? When's the first production meeting? Because someone has a script.
And we will be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul.
Something else that I think they were good at, Paul, you just mentioned like making the guy real, is making people real. And yes, that it would be done, I think, in concert with us, but like turning Haywire into somebody that by the end of his tenure on the show, you're like, oh, I feel for this guy. Killed his parents, dangerous man, all kinds of problems. But the humanity behind kind of everyone. Like it starts with Lincoln as a premise. I remember reading the script, and Paul, I went in the opposite direction of you. I was like, I see somebody who's written to be the good girl. And I was like, so what's the fault? So I was like, where's the fault in this person? And I wrote this whole thing up and sent it to Sharing about like, I think she's got addiction issues.
Which they embraced.
Which absolutely in a much bigger way than I ever anticipated. But there was a sense of co-creating a character together and of having a common goal, which I never heard sort of stated obviously, but let's build people. For all the plot and all the machinations, we're trying to make people.
Yeah, and they didn't have to, and I think that as actors sometimes we get siloed in our own brains about it's most important that what I had for lunch is crucial to that. What all that did was it made the central theme and story which is about Michael and Lincoln, more interesting. Because if Haywire is real,
right,
as opposed to just a crazy guy,
right,
Michael has somebody challenging to contend with. And then he adds value when they're out, but he's also more dangerous when he's out. If Sarah has an addiction issue, she's a more vulnerable person than just a good girl to fall in love with. She could become unreliable. She could be blackmailed. She could be a problem for Michael. She could affect this main thing. It's not just ensemble,
it's
character work. It's not class. It still has this narrative drive to it, which I think is
storytelling. It's good storytelling because they leave open. And I think what the point of the good storytelling and what we're describing to me is that they leave stuff open.
You have to leave room for the accidents.
And you know what you need to do in order to do that? You need a writer's room. Because one person can't do all that.
And you need the person on set who's like, hey, I was talking to Silas at lunch. Did you realize that he studied religion? Wouldn't it be interesting if we...
That's incredibly perceptive, Paul, because the thing I'm describing was basically written by one person. You're hit the nail on the head.
You can't adjust. You don't have. There's too much work to be done. You can't. Yeah. There's too much that work for that person to do.
I feel like we could go on, but I know that two folks have hard outs in 10 minutes, and I want to respect that. There's kids who need to be picked up and taken places. Really, really, really good to see you. There's a bunch of fan questions we did not get to. I'm sorry about that. Let's do a wrap up right now, Paul.
Okay.
You want to wrap us up?
No, you're so much better at that stuff.
You're such an asshole.
Why?
All right. All right. Friends, we're out of time, which is a real bummer because I got to tell you, I have not once in my life spent time either talking or being in the presence of young Silas here without just feeling like there was so much intelligence and compassion and humanity. And those are not necessarily the three most popular actor traits, depending on who you're talking to.
Just reintegrating with you guys is just, it's been a delight. And I feel the same way. It's really fun and heartwarming, frankly.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I am signing off. Paul, you want to sign off for the people?
Thank you for joining us. Please listen along on the rewatch.
Thank you, Silas. Goodbye.
Mwah. Bye.
Mwah. Ciao, everyone.
Bye, guys. Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul is a Caliber Studio production. Your hosts have been friends, but not besties. Sarah Wayne Callies and Paul Adelstein. Our prison warden has been producer Ben Haber. Keeping us slim and trim in the prison yard has been sound designer and editor Jeff Schmidt. Keeping us up to date on the outside world is production assistant Drew Austin. Letting the world know what's been happening to us in prison is social media manager Emma Tolkien. Our music was done by Paul Adelstein. Our prison artist, logo, and brand designer is John Nunziato and Little Big Brands. Check him out at www.littlebigbrands.com. Follow us on Instagram at Prison Break Podcast. Email us at prisonbreaking@caliberstudio.com. And call us at 401-3-P-BREAK. Prison Breaking with Sarah and Paul has been a Caliber Studio production. Thank you for listening.